You can't stand up before I talk. Yeah. Now you have to stand up at the end, or I'm going to be really in for it. This is actually my second time in Iowa City. I came here for the first time about maybe 15 years ago. I was in my mid-20s, and I'll share a little color from my trip. I was working as a documentary filmmaker, as Luciano said. We had a production break. We ended up here in Iowa City. I'm a young single guy, and it was one of the football weekends here, which is kind of a madhouse, I discovered. And at some point in the afternoon, two young scholars had suspended me upside down above a keg of beer. And I was kind of drinking it against gravity. And so I guess I'd like to think I first came as a man of the people, and now I'm part of some more elevated environment. That's, I guess, what happens when you grow up. But no, I loved it. It's just an amazing little town. So many great things happening. And I think this is one of the most exciting initiatives in higher education around the country. And I've gotten to know Luciano over the last year, and I'm confident he's going to be a great leader with, of course, the support from a heavy-hitting governor. And I thought I'd take my remarks to really set the stakes, to remind everyone of why we're doing this. And then I'll talk a bit about how we can do it, some of the lessons that I've seen for people being successful. The why really hit home earlier this year when my friend Charlie Kirk launched his campus tour with a stop at Utah Valley University. I had talked with Charlie during the transition period, and he had called me and he said, "Hey, I'm here at Mar-a-Lago. We're trying to figure out who should lead the Department of Education. Can you come by and let's figure out some names so that we can solve these problems on campus?" And so, trading messages back and forth, trying to get people in. I think they were doing, Trump style, the apprentice interviews. You're fired, you're hired. I don't know. Kind of a madhouse as well. But Charlie was someone who really understood. Charlie was someone, by the way, didn't have a college degree, but understood better than anyone the problem, or really the crisis on American campuses. And, I refused to watch the video of what happened. But it struck me deeply for him, for his family, for the country, for the academic institutions. And what I think it really demonstrated in the most horrific way possible is that conservative speech has been so forbidden from American campuses. It's such a threat to the dominance of these institutions that feel like they are entitled to have a left-wing orthodoxy and nothing else is accepted, that the only way to confront conservative ideas is with the barrel of a gun. And so for many years, liberals said conservative speech is violence. And yet Charlie, who was someone who did it all the right way, he would sit down with anyone, he would debate the great ideas, he would ask people to change his mind. When he was going there and saying, "I'm going to challenge this orthodoxy," you can see it even in the writings of the alleged assassin. He was treated in a way as if he was beyond not only the range of reasonable discourse, but could not even be permitted to speak. And this is a very serious thing that we shouldn't underestimate. I remember in the weeks afterwards, all of us in the conservative media, intellectual, academic world, kind of calling each other to try to figure out how to do it. And it had an enormous impact. I talked to some folks who have been doing campus tours. Ben Shapiro, for example, says, "Yeah, my security detail, I'm out here giving a speech, says that it's so dangerous that I'm not even supposed to leave my hotel room." I had a number of speeches that were canceled. They said, "Hey, we can't guarantee your safety on campus." And so, okay, these are extreme examples, but they're extreme examples of something that is absolutely pervasive, and everyone in this room knows it. The ideas of our country, the ideas of the American founding, core American principles, liberty, equality, virtue, civic association, have been effectively erased from most campuses around the United States. And, when I was kind of reading about this story and trying to figure out why, what happened, this individual, the alleged assassin, what would motivate a young man to take such nihilistic action? And I think we can actually, as Americans, as Christians, we can actually try to understand what was happening in this young man's life too. Wasn't that much younger than Charlie Kirk. And from the reporting that we've seen in the New York Post and elsewhere, this is someone who had been ill-served by the institutions around him. This is someone who was wrapped up in ideologies, particular transgender ideology. This is someone who had, from the discourse in the digital world in particular, had absorbed the idea that it was okay to kill because of a difference of opinion. And not everyone is willing to take such drastic action, thank God. But these ideas don't come from nowhere. In fact, these ideas come from academic institutions. And if you look at many of the problems in American life, you look at racialist ideology, you look at gender ideology, and you look at the nihilism that is affecting so many young people who feel like their country isn't worth participating in, who feel like they have nowhere to go, who feel like their lives are at a dead end. They want to tear it all down. These are symptoms of, you're the director, you're excused, that's okay. The phone ringing, yeah. But these ideas come from part of the public mind which is formulated in our universities. And universities can be great. Universities historically in the United States have been incredible institutions. But it requires good leadership, it requires thoughtful scholars, and it requires a system of values that can actually be built upon. And that's not how I would describe particularly many humanities and social science programs today. And so if we want to teach young people how they can succeed in this country, how they can appreciate their traditions, and how they can contribute to society, we have to have significant reforms. And I look back and I think, all of these ideas have been pushed to the margins so that it's up to a 25-year-old kid, 29-year-old kid to set up a booth on the quad and to just debate people coming by. Which again is a great thing, but it's a sign that the leaders of these institutions have failed. And actually, we need to bring those ideas into the institutions. And the fact that the majority opinion, not just in a state like Iowa, but the majority of opinion across the country, is almost totally unrepresented, should be a 5-alarm fire. There should be a significant cause for concern. And so how do we fix this? The center is a great start, but I'd like to talk a little bit more deeply about the relationships between the political and the university, the republic and the academic institutions. Because I think this is a cause for a lot of confusion, and in particular, confusion even on our side of things. Conservatives have been, maybe hoodwinked a little bit by some of the institutional leaders, some of the bureaucrats, some of the sweet-talking development officials, come to the football game, don't worry about everything else, into believing a series of ideas that I think are myths. Many of you have probably heard about the free marketplace of ideas, right? This is a free marketplace of ideas. Some of you have heard arguments about institutional autonomy or academic independence. You've heard these? And then some of you have heard the one that I think is even more pernicious, is you should teach students how to think, not what to think. Which if you're a kindergartner sounds kind of, wow, that sounds amazing. But I would actually submit to you that all three of these are the wrong way to think about academic institutions. And that we've narrowed the conception of what academic institutions mean to such a degree that these become actually a disservice. First, the free marketplace of ideas. In theory, sounds great. You have a wide variety of opinions. The best opinions compete in the marketplace, supply and demand, people use their reasoning capacity and the best ideas emerge. History tells a different story. History tells a kind of inverted marketplace of ideas, where in most universities in the United States today, the worst ideas emerge to the top. The ideas that have not worked anywhere. You have academic surveys in the social sciences saying that 40% of social science professors are Marxists. Well, history has rendered judgment. These ideas don't work. It's not a marketplace, but it's actually a cartel-like system. That's what many academic institutions have devolved into. They turn into academic cartels. The departments run the show. They gatekeep and restrict so that there is only one accepted set of ideas. You see this over and over and over. The other idea about academic independence, I think, is really important. Academic leaders, will tell political leaders, you guys write the check and then, go back to what you're doing, but we have institutional autonomy. Sadly, in other states, not in the great state of Iowa, but in other states, conservative Republicans that have a majority in legislatures, the governorship, have bought into this idea. And they'll say, Chris, the academic independence is part of our great classical liberal tradition. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And so some history, I think, is important because it shows what institutions were in the past and what they could be. Again, academic institutions in the United States, especially public institutions, were never intended to be fully autonomous. The most famous founding of a public institution in the United States was, of course, Thomas Jefferson's University of Virginia. The governor had a beautiful line from Jefferson. But if you read Jefferson's document, the Rockfish Gap Report, this is, he said it was one of his top 3 greatest achievements, founding the university. You see something very curious. It actually doesn't represent what liberal administrators and faculty would like to say. But in fact, he makes it very clear. He says that the University of Virginia is essentially a contract between the people and the republic and the government, right? The people elect their government. The government provides funding for the university, and the university has a reciprocal obligation to uphold certain standards. And he makes very clear, he says that the university should be subject to the control of the legislature at all times and in all things. I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, but that's pretty definitive. At all times and at all things. I like lawyers now in my in IP law, it's in perpetuity throughout the universe, So if you're like a musician now, or I had like a couple of films that sadly didn't make a lot of money throughout the universe, but they would say throughout the universe. And it's like, wow. So if they watch your movie on a NASA flight, you'll get a royalty cut. Still waiting for that one. But there's a kind of beauty into this, because what the founders understood that we seem to have forgotten, that the ultimate authority of public institutions is the public. And the public's will should be represented in all of the operations of the university. To the point, for Jefferson, says the legislature, if there's programs, curriculum, faculty, structures that aren't working, the legislature comes and reforms the institution to make sure that they're representing the public. And so don't be snowed by people who are saying, if you meddle with the university, you're destroying our democracy. The opposite is actually true. And so I'm heartened that after a period of maybe neglect, legislators, including great legislators in the room here, are waking up to their fundamental rights to represent the people, but also their fundamental duty, which is to ensure that our institutions are serving the public good and they reflect the values of the public. Imagine that. And you also want to think about, I ask university leaders all the time, it's a great question. What is the purpose of a university? You ask the kindergarten questions, you actually learn a lot, people's answer. And I get the sense from many academic leaders that the purpose of the university for them is to build shiny new buildings, to raise money in the capital fund, to attend, the big game. But you have to think about getting back to the deepest purpose of the university, and you can go back to our founding documents. They make it actually very clear. It's very illuminating. Even for a university like Harvard, for example, which is a great one to pick on. You look at the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. You guys are politics nerds, so I can get away with this in a speech. You go back and you read it, and it's actually written into the Constitution. The people of the state of Massachusetts will provide the funds, the operations, the land, certain benefits to the university, the college in Cambridge, Harvard. But the college has a duty. You're not going to believe this. This has been a long time. To honor God, to train the citizen for leadership in both church and state. Don't tell liberals that one. That's going to make them really mad. And then the third thing is to benefit the nation, to honor God, the creator, to train the young for leadership in a republic, so to teach them the art of self-government, and to benefit the nation, not just in the humanities, but also in the sciences, so that America is a leader, not just in the Western tradition. They were learning Latin and Greek back then, but also an innovator in commerce, in the arts, in mechanical, in engineering, agriculture. A lot of agriculture here. And when I read these documents, I feel inspired. And I feel like the university has drifted into this mass bureaucratic machine that it's oftentimes very difficult to figure out, what are we supposed to do? What are the principles that we're moving toward? And this brings us to the question of academic freedom. Academic freedom, I would challenge to have a balanced notion of academic freedom. I mean, there's a good version and a bad version. William F. Buckley, of course, called academic freedom a superstition, so there's that argument. But I think if you look at the founding documents and the great institutions of that time, they were always pairing freedom with responsibility. They were pairing liberty with virtue. And so they were maintaining a complex system, because freedom that's not oriented towards virtue can very easily devolve into vice. We've seen this, right? Academic, intellectual license, you have courses or curricula that seem to be, there's no structure, there's no guiding principle. And so I think a center of academic freedom is desperately needed. I think having a diversity of voices is desperately needed. But I think we also have to remind people that academic freedom is a means to an end. And I think the end is very elegantly stated by the great leaders of the past: to pursue the truth, to teach the young the art of citizenship, and to benefit the state, to benefit the country. Okay, so that's the why. And then the question, well, that sounds great. These are very high ideals, but what do we do? The provost is driving me nuts, Chris. These are the questions that come up. I think, first of all, you have to have confidence in the political principle. To say, hey, wait a minute, the people are in charge here. We're the representatives of the people, and we're going to enforce it. I think Governor DeSantis of Florida was, one of the early leaders on academic reform, and he really understood this concept. And he say, wait a minute, how do we have a little college, New College of Florida in Sarasota? It's a left-wing training center, just like that college that was demolished in France. It's a gender studies, program. It's like it's total. It's a left wing. Its reputation, even according to the college's own consultants. The college, this is great. They did this, and I hammered them with it for like 2 years. They actually commissioned a report, and the public perception of the college was left wing, gender bending, crunchy granola. And then they said, this is a very limited audience for us in Florida. We can't recruit students. And the governor said, he appointed a number of us as trustees, says, you're going to go take over this college, replace all of the leadership, and turn it into the first classical American public university in the United States. I said, all right, I like this challenge. And I remember we kind of meet him in an airplane hangar. It's all very dramatic, very cinematic. And we're like, all right, let's go announce this thing. There's protesters outside. It's very crazy. One of them actually assaulted me and was arrested for it, which was a lot of fun for me. And I remember something that he said. He said, hey, he said, Governor, look, we want to do this, but we need your commitment that you're going to go all the way. And he says, absolutely. And then he says to us, get ready because the media is going to come after you nonstop. And he was right. There were probably about 1,000, maybe 2,000 news articles attacking our initiative at New College of Florida. And there were maybe like one op-ed in the National Review saying, actually, this is a good idea. And he says, don't get distracted. Keep pushing, keep fighting, and understand that the public can see through this and the public supports what we're doing. He feels very confident. That's what happens when you win re-election by 20 points. You feel confident. And then he says, if you're not driving negative headlines, you're not doing your job. I remember him saying that. I was like, that is like perfect. And of course, it causes this firestorm. And I think that the story of that takeover of New College is maybe instructive, maybe hopefully not as dramatic everywhere. But there's a couple things that I learned. The first thing is that when we arrived on campus, the new trustees, the governor says as a mandate, I say, all right, I'm going to come with my team and we're going to meet with the leadership. I said, to the leaders, a very simple question. What are the problems here on campus? Kindergarten questions. And the provost, always the provost who's the most problems. She says, there are no problems here. And I said, well, that's interesting because I just got the Board of Education stat sheet. And actually on all of the metrics from the state of Florida, New College ranks dead last in all of them. Why do you think that is? Those aren't the metrics that matter to us here, And so you get this, really, really kind of intensive thing. I said, okay, fine, okay. All right, well, we're going to have a public event the next day. I was going to do a town hall. Overnight, I get a call from the university saying, there's been a death threat. They're going to, I can't remember what it was. It's been a while. It was a bomb or something. We're going to kill the new trustees. Okay. And we recommend canceling the event. I say, absolutely not. We're not going to cancel the event. Death threats are you can't give a veto to the people who threaten violence. Full stop. You can't do it. Okay. All right. Yeah, everyone's scrambling. And then they get law enforcement, set up a cordon. There's dogs. There's a SWAT team. It's a pretty intensive situation. The provost again, comes back and we're in the lobby. It's a kind of a circus. And she says, we're shutting down the event. I said, we're shutting down the event. We're not going to shut down the event. And she's, really like pointing a finger in my face. And I realized this person has been bullying everybody who would want to do the right thing. And she's been here for 30 years and she's gotten away with it. This is exactly the problem. And so cameras are rolling and I just say, hey, look, there's a constitution. We have the constitutional authority to run the university. You're not the boss. We are. I'm instructing the police to open the doors. I'm willing to take the risks and we're going to get this done. And if you have any problems with it, you can consult the organizational chart. So pulling rank a little bit. And then of course, this person finally backs off and we open the event. It's a big success, peaceful, fine. But I learned a really big lesson at that time about how academic institutions are supposed to run and how they run in practice. They're very passive aggressive institutions. You guys, I hear like deep sighing over here. Like, oh my God. They rely on social signaling, right? It's not, look, academic institutions, it's not like a market signal. It's a social signal, intimidation, ostracization, bullying, shaming, isolation. These are the tactics where people who feel like it's their institution, that these are the tactics they use to enforce their orthodoxy. And so New College of Florida in Florida had a DEI department, gender studies program, left-wing activist coursework. There wasn't a single conservative professor on campus. And they saw their self-conception was, we train the left-wing activists of the future. We're entitled to that, and the government is not allowed to interfere. It's like the government is not allowed to interfere with the government. Like I'm thinking like this doesn't make much sense. But they had gotten away with it for many, many years. And, what it took was some decisive action and leadership. And the governor demonstrated it, legislators demonstrated it, we demonstrated it in our own small way. And then we got down to business. Fired the president, fired the provost. Well, no, let me make a legal correction. We gracefully facilitated the exit of the provost. Yeah. So the lawyers, which was great. We abolished the DEI program. We shut down the gender studies program, the first time that had ever been done in American history, to just shut down an academic program like that, because it's not serving the public interest. I asked the gender studies program leader, I said, can you tell me the difference between a man and a woman? And she's hemming and hawing. She clearly knows what I'm trying to get at. And I asked her, what's the difference between a man and a woman? She said, kind of malfunctions a little bit. And I said, hey, look, we require a basic level of academic rigor. And if you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, I'm not sure we're making the cut here, the gender studies program. And so you have full authority to do the right thing. And one thing I learned too about academics is that when you actually confront them directly, the passive aggressive strategy that has won them control of these institutions doesn't hold up very well. But they know that the media is going to be on their side. They know that the faculty is going to be on their side, and they rely on that cultural pressure to put you back in the box. And so we have to all, in our small ways or big ways, break out of that. You have to deny the legitimacy, not only of that style of governing the institutions, but you have to call out and deny the legitimacy of those political tactics, because they're very political. And then you have to communicate a vision of the institution that goes so much higher than what's at offer. And I really hope that is the ultimate goal of this center, other centers like it, because the university was always conceived by the founders of our country as really the crown jewel of our civilization. And I think it's very fitting. I got a nice tour of this building, which is beautiful, unbelievable building. And I thought it was very fitting. And like, when you see something that underscores your thesis, you're like, this is great, I have to use it. So this was originally the state legislature. Then they left in 1847, I think, the 46, 47, something like that. 57, okay. And then moved to Des Moines. And then what did it become? Building 0001 of the University of Iowa. And so the metaphor there, the symbolism there, is that the people who founded this state, who wrote the Constitution in these rooms, understood that the university is a fundamentally political, not ideological, but a fundamentally political institution. And that the state government, which represented all of the people, had the authority and the duty to make sure that the university served the public good. And so it's not a free marketplace of ideas. It's not a pure laissez-faire system. Laissez-faire, good for the economy, doesn't quite translate into the realm of the spiritual, the intellectual, the cultural. I mean, the cultural, right? What seeds in the marketplace is not exactly the high culture, right? But the university was conceived as a place to set that star, right? Jefferson talks about the bright constellation of our principles. Beautiful phrase, poetic. And that's what the university does. You have the opportunity to step away from the world of the day-to-day politics, day-to-day commerce, day-to-day drama, to go study the stars, study agriculture, study literature, study the great works. And the public gives you trust. And I fear that the universities have been violating that trust for many, many decades. And so you be unapologetic, assert your power and authority, and remind the people that these institutions are not their fiefdom, but they're on loan. And if they don't do the right thing, if they don't uphold the public good, if they don't respect the work of the legislature, they're out. And just as a final note, I'll try to make this as subtle as possible. The governor is here, legislators are here, regents are here. The president and the provost, always the provost, haven't graced us with their presence tonight. These aren't people I know personally, but I would just say, why is that? What's more important than the beginning of an academic research institution that was commissioned by the legislature, that has really the highest aspiration of the university at its core, to unlock the freedom of thinking and to reorient the university towards the highest good? And so these are the questions that may not be comfortable to consider, but they're the questions that we should consider and must consider. And I think that this state, is really an incredible one. From my first keg stand to the opening of the Academic Research Center. And to close, before we take some questions, I want to tie it all back. I think this is what Charlie Kirk's ultimate mission was to remind the people in a position of authority. You can deny our ideas. You can deny our faith. You can deny our culture. You can deny America itself. We don't have an academic department. We don't have the provost's office. We don't have control over the institution. But you know what? We're going to come, we're going to set up a booth, and we're going to talk. And so we need to have a country where that's possible, not just on the outside, but on the inside. And I think, too, if we have great universities, we can solve the other problem, this problem of nihilism. The man who assassinated Charlie Kirk was the victim of a profound cultural nihilism. This is something we can't blame on mental illness, on the randomness of chance, on just the kind of left-wing ideologies, although it certainly has all of those features. This is a problem that our society doesn't know what it's supposed to be, doesn't know what it's supposed to teach our young people, and hasn't given them those foundations where they feel like they can live a good and productive life. And so what you're doing is extremely important. Beyond a center, beyond politics, beyond all of this, it's a calling. And it's so great to see some old faces, some new faces, and I just wish you the best of luck. Thank you.